I'm got late. Welcome to PDX International Airport. I used to work here. This is chapter 14, Prelude to Resignations. 1997 had been an all-consuming year for the detectives working the murder investigation. The stress of trying to solve the murder of a child was difficult enough, but the relentless coverage of the media presented additional pressure and challenges. Nearly 44,000 hours of overtime were logged by the end of the first year, and many of the detectives working the case had spent more time in the office and on the road than they had with their own families. The division that had developed between the DA's office and the Boulder Police Department investigators brought an entirely new level of frustration to the men and women who were striving to uncover the truth on the matter. The Ramseys had concluded one follow-up interview with investigators in the spring, and it didn't look like they were willing to return to the table anytime soon. Test results were trickling back from the crime labs, and detectives were still awaiting the arrival of clothing articles that had been requested of the family. In some instances, they needed the clothing worn by the family on the night and the day of the murder to compare against trace evidence found on the scene and on the body of JonBenet. In the fall of that year, the FBI had invited the Boulder authorities to Quantico to present and review of the elements of their case. The detectives were excited about the opportunity to share the information that had been gathered up to that point in time, and had hoped that the insight of the federal investigators would provide them with some leverage with the intruder theorist in the Boulder DA's office. As teams from both agencies prepared to head to Virginia, Vanity Fair ran an article on the status of the investigation. It was highly critical of Alex Hunter's handling of the case, and a retired federal agent quoted in the article expressed the opinion that the DA's release of the police reports to the Ramseys team in advance to their April 1997 interview was tantamount to prosecutorial malfeasance. The former agent Greg McCary had served 25 years with the FBI and indicated that he had at one time been recruited by one of the Ramsey defense investigators to join their team. McCary did not hesitate to decline the offer and cited his reasons in the article because on the ratio of 12-1, child murders are committed by parents or family member. In this case, you also have an elaborate staging, the ransom note, the placement of the child's body, and I have never in my career seen or heard about a staging where it was not a family member or someone very close to the family. Just the note alone told me that the killer was in the family or close to it. With regard to the ransom note and the practice note found on Patsy's notepad, McCary went on to say that the kidnappers do not spend hours at a crime scene after murdering their victims and composing letters. Hunter and his team reportedly were not very happy with the article's portrayal of his office and were now spreading across the country. Hunter and his team reportedly were not very happy with the article's portrayal of his office that was now spreading across the country. He ultimately decided not to attend the Quantico presentation and sent senior members of his command staff in his stead. Boulder investigators spent a couple of days sharing the details of their case, discussing the theories that had been proposed, and listened to the suggested avenues of investigation as proposed by the experts who comprised the KASKU team. Members of the FBI had been in fairly regular consultation with the Boulder detectives throughout the course of the investigation, but this was the first opportunity they had to participate in a detailed overview of the evidence collected thus far in the case. The FBI agents continued to point out the statistics and case histories pointed to parental, family, and insider involvement when a child was murdered in the home. Stranger abductions were far and few in between, and their cumulative experience suggested that authorities needed to continue to take a hard look at the parents. In reviewing similar cases, there had only been one instance in which a child had been taken for ransom and then found murdered in the home. It was the JonBenet Ramsey homicide investigation. The agents also expressed the belief that Patsy had authored the ransom note after the death of JonBenét as a means to covering up the murder. Although it was possible, they considered it highly unlikely that an intruder would have spent that time to have written the note while in the home. The additional evidence of a staged crime scene led them to further discount the intruder-kidnapper theory. Boulder prosecutors reportedly were adamant in their denial that either John or Patsy Ramsey could have been involved in the murder of their daughter. It was reported that voices had been raised and that the table had been taking a pounding during a heated debate. Cutting short his attendance of the meeting, Lou Schmidt was off to collect potential intruder suspect from a jail in Tennessee. The man was brought back to Boulder on unrelated charges and eventually cleared as the perpetrator of JonBenét's murder. Boulder investigators went away from the Quantico presentation with the feeling that not much ground had been gained during their review of the case. Prosecutors had not been swayed in the least by the FBI's professional assessment on the case, and they appeared to be dead set against any theory of crime that involved the parents. The first-year anniversary of JonBenét's murder came and went, and investigators continued to plug away at a series of tasks that the DA's office had wanted completed. It seemed like the task list was never-ending, and continuous additions were being made as time slipped by. It was reported that the Ramseys had attempted to arrange an interview with the Boulder Police Department investigators in January throughout the intermediary Father Haverstock from the family church in Boulder. Defense attorneys were purportedly not involved in the outreach, but after some discussions, police decided not to pursue the get-together. The conditions set forth by the Ramseys were not to their liking. They wanted to see more police reports and evidence collected in the case in exchange for the interview. The Ramsey attorneys subsequently issued a press release indicating that police had declined another interview with the parents of the murdered child. Boulder Police Department investigators looked at the event as one in a series of media releases that were attempting to paint them as the uncooperative bad guys and felt that the offer to an interview had been insincere. Over the course of the winter, both the DA's office and the Boulder Police sought the assistance in advance of additional experts. Alex Hunter brought on several Metro Denver area prosecutors to consult and advise him on the case. These men were seasoned prosecutors who handled many more homicide cases than what Boulder had experienced. They included Adams County DA Bob Grant, Denver DA Bill Ritter, and Jefferson County DA Dave Thomas. Hunter arranged to have Dr. Henry Lee and Barry Scheck review the DNA evidence that had been collected during the case. Both Lee and Scheck had been involved in the O.J. Simpson murder trial and were considered experts on the topic of DNA evidence. Frustrated by the perceived lack of cooperation they had been receiving from their own DA's office, Boulder police sought their own set of experienced prosecutors. Denver attorney Dan Callips had initially been approached for the assistance, and he eventually recruited the series of 3 attorneys working in the Denver area. They included Rich Bearer, a former New York prosecutor, Dan Hoffman, a former dean of Denver University Law School, and former state public safety commissioner Bob Miller, who had served as a U.S. attorney. This group of attorneys would subsequently be referred to as the Boulder Police Department's prosecutorial dream team, and would offer investigators invaluable insight and advice on how to proceed with their investigation. The publicity the case was attracting seemed to serve as a magnet for some of the more disturbed individuals consumed by this little girl's death. In one instance, someone bound in duct tape a nude Barbie doll and left it on the front lawn of the vacant 15th Street Ramsey home. In another instance, a male had been arrested by police for theft of some pages of the morgue log located on the Boulder Community Hospital. Following his release from jail on the charge, he found his way to the Ramsey home and spent the night sitting on their back patio staring at the house. Later that night, he tried to set fire to the home and pushing lit papers through the mail slot located near the front door. He called Detective Gosage late the next morning to confess to his crimes. Investigators responded to the home following this revelation and confirmed that an attempted arson had occurred and booked him into the Boulder County Jail on felony charges. The man was subsequently sentenced to 2 years in the county jail in January 1998. The media continued to pound at the division that had developed between the police and the prosecutors, and in an effort to put a positive face on the matter, Alex Hunter and Mark Beckner agreed to join forces and move their teams of investigators to a secure room in the Boulder County Criminal Justice Center. It was dubbed the War Room, and the Boulder Police Department investigative files and computers were set up to serve as a central location from which to conduct the inquiry into JonBenét's murder. Although the idea of a task force is not a unique idea when it comes to handling the investigation of major crimes, the successful use of one almost always requires that its members share the same vision and goals. In this instance, the two teams of investigators had been forced by their superiors to share investigative quarters and were diametrically opposed to one another in their interpretation of the crime. By the time the teams had joined forces in the War Room, there were firmly held beliefs about where the inquiry needed to go, and countless discussions failed to dissuade either side of their position on the matter. It was akin to an effort of mixing oil and water. Try as hard as you want, it just wasn't going to happen. The death knell of the effort to combine forces came to a Boulder Police Department investigator returning to the War Room after days off of discovering that his computer was not functioning properly. It appeared that someone had tried to hack into the secure investigative files of the case from his workstation. The computer contained a number of files, but one in particular item of concern was that it held the results of the preliminary DNA testing. It is important to note that in this period of time, DNA testing often took months to see any return of lab results. In today's environment, DNA results can be turned around as quickly as 24 hours from submission. The DNA test results were something that Boulder Police Department held back from the DA's office because the alleged leaks in the media, and they suspected that someone from their team had been responsible for compromising the computer of the detective who had managed that information. A series of security card reader system for the door to the War Room revealed that one unauthorized entry had been attempted over the weekend. The security guard belonged to Deputy DA, who had been involved with the investigation but who had not been granted security clearance to enter that room. The security system indicated that, in fact, no entrance had been gained through the attempted card swipe, but Boulder Police Department investigators wondered why the attempted entry with the use of this card had been made at all. No one who had legitimate access to the War Room admitted to hacking the detective's computer, and the police department subsequently requested the assistance of the Colorado Bureau of Investigation's computer technology team. The hard drive of the computer was examined for signs of unauthorized access, and it was subsequently publicly announced that the malfunction had been attributed to an equipment problem and had not been the result of an unauthorized breach of the computer. Detectives had been told by their own IT wizard that the computer had in no certain terms been compromised. Despite the CBI's press release, they continued to believe that someone in the DA's office had hacked the computer in search for the DNA information. Same DNA information John Ramsey still wants. The alleged breach of the computer hack had taken place within a few days of the War Room being opened and set the tone for the interactions with the Boulder Police Department investigators that would have with their counterparts in the upcoming weeks. After only 1.5 months, Boulder investigators would abandon the secure room at the Justice Center and move back to the environs of their own building. There had been a serious deliberation in the police department about pushing for a grand jury after the FBI had spoken to the issue, and this continued to gain momentum through the spring of 1998. Hunter indicated that he was willing to consider the use of a grand jury, but he first wanted to see what Boulder Police Department had that would establish the threshold he needed for a successful prosecution. Investigators were tasked with putting together a presentation for the DA's office that supported the need of conveying the grand jury inquiry. Over the course of 2 days in early June 1998, Boulder investigators and other forensic experts proceeded to outline the evidence that had been collected and examined in the case. Lead investigators who presented during the briefing included Detective Sergeant Tom Wickman and Detective Steve Thomas, Tom Trejo, and Jan Harmer. Opinions were offered as the possible interpretation of some evidence and conclusions that could be inferred therefrom. The presentation took place at the Coors Event Center located at the University of Colorado Boulder campus. Approximately 40 people attended, representing agencies from the Colorado Attorney General's Office, the Colorado Bureau of Investigation, and the FBI's Child Abduction and Serial Killer Unit, Boulder Police Department's Dream Teams, Hunter's group of consulting DAs, and members of his staff, along with Dr. Lee and Barry Scheck. Media trucks with satellite dishes camped in the surrounding parking lot. A detailed analysis was provided regarding key pieces of evidence, which included the opinions of the authorship of the ransom note, evidence that pointed to prior acts of chronic sexual abuse, and the pineapple found in JonBenét's digestive tract, and the fingerprints evidence linking Patsy and Burke to the fruit. Additional information was provided by the paintbrush found in the paint tray located outside of the room where JonBené had been discovered, and its use in the garrote had been used to end her life. The trace samples of DNA that had been analyzed thus far were discussed, and Lee and Scheck weighed in their expert opinions. The conclusion was reached that more work was needed with regard to this evidence. The long-delayed examination of fibers found on the sticky side of the duct tape used to silence JonBené had finally returned from the lab. Only days before the presentation, Boulder Police Department investigators had learned from the fibers that Patsy Ramsey's black and red essentials jacket were consistent with those found on the duct tape. This suggested to some investigators that Patsy had been in direct personal contact with the duct tape used to cover her daughter's mouth, an element believed to have been used in the staging of the crime. She purportedly had never been in the basement on the morning of the kidnapping when the tape had been recovered. How could the transfer of this fiber evidence take place if it was an intruder who had brought the tape to the home during the kidnapping? Sergeant Wickman was tasked in presenting information discounted the suggestion that an intruder had been responsible for the crime. A series of theoretical questions were posed that challenged the logic behind the intruder's involvement. Boulder Police Department investigators believed there were too many illogical, conflicting behavioral elements in the case to have involved an outside perpetrator. It was stressed that the evidence to the prior vaginal trauma suggested that either the intruder had the opportunity to visit JonBené on many occasions prior to her murder, or that the person responsible for her sexual abuse and her homicide were different people altogether. A synopsis was provided that detailed the Boulder Police Department's efforts to clear all of the registered sex offenders who resided in the area and other suspects who came to the attention of authorities during their investigation. In this view, all evidence collected up to that point in time had pointed to family involvement. Boulder investigators were pinning their hopes on the weight of this evidence and were confident in that their presentation would convince Hunter to convene a grand jury. They closed the presentation with a list of things they believed should be pursued through the investigative subpoena powers of a grand jury. Hunter spoke to the media at the conclusion of the 2-day presentation. "This is all about finding the killer of JonBené and justice. We do not have enough in the case file, and we have a lot of work to do. I will go back to my people and analyze what we have heard over a number of hours and make sure it is sensible to spend the time it takes to run a grand jury." The investigators who had been leading the charge for a year and a half went home to their families and awaited the DA's decision. They had been put every ounce of energy into the preparation of argument for the convening of a grand jury, and now there seemed to be nothing left for them to do. The case had effectively been turned over to the DA's office at the conclusion of the event center briefing. They would subsequently learn that the Ramseys had agreed to participate in another round of interviews with the DA's office, but Boulder Police Department would not be involved. In fact, the DA's office would not even reveal the location of the interviews that would take place with the parents in Colorado. They were told to stay away from Georgia, which is where Burke was to be interviewed. The interviews took place over the course of 3 days in June 1998, and Boulder Police Department investigators were granted the opportunity to review the videotapes of the Q&A sessions during the evenings between interviews. It was not the most ideal set of circumstances for the investigators who wanted to ask their own questions of the family, but it was better than nothing. Hunter seemed to be dragging his feet on announcing his decision as to whether or not he could convene a grand jury, and Steve Thomas had had enough. Not long after the conclusion of his agency's presentation on the murder case, he submitted a request for unpaid leave from the department. After months of enduring grueling work and frustration, he needed time to recuperate and gather his thoughts. As Hunter postured on the use of a grand jury, it was announced that Boulder's lead investigators wouldn't even be sworn in on the case. It was possible that only one representative from the Boulder Police Department would be authorized to participate as a grand jury investigator. This meant that the majority of the detectives who were most familiar with the evidence in the case would be prevented from sitting in on the testimony of witnesses called before the jury. Additionally, they would not be able to see or review any of the documents and records that would be returned by subpoena. This proposed course of action left more than a few scratching their heads in wonderment. Thomas timed the submission of his letter of resignation to coincide with JonBenét's August 6th birthday. She would have turned 8 years old that summer. In an 8-page letter addressed to Chief Mark Beckner, recently appointed as police chief after Tom Kobe's forced departure, Thomas spelled out the frustrations he experienced as a lead investigator in the murder case. He specifically blasted Alex Hunter and the members of his office for the incompetence and mishandling of the investigation. He detailed a litany of things the DA's office had failed to do and he felt had only served to obstruct the police inquiry into the matter. In the end, Thomas indicated that he would no longer be part of the game that the murder investigation had become. Until such a special prosecutor was appointed to take over the case, Boulder detectives wanted nothing to do with the investigation. The media managed to get their hands on a copy of the letter, and additional pressure was brought to bear on the investigation. A week later, Hunter officially announced that his office would present the case to the Boulder County Grand Jury. He declined to share the details of exactly when and where the inquiry would begin. Fleet and Priscilla White, who had been trying to get a special prosecutor involved with the case since December 1997, authored a second letter to the media that was published on August 17, 1998. It expressed similar sentiments of the letter that had preceded it in January of that year. The Whites expressed dismay at the recent departure of Detective Thomas and went on to espouse a complicated theory of conspiracy involving the DA's decision to delay the use of a grand jury. They apparently believed that if a grand jury failed to indict anyone in the family, that Hunter could then ask them to issue a report that would vindicate the family and point the finger of blame at the police for a botched investigation. It was a lengthy and complicated discussion of changes that had taken place to Colorado grand jury news. It was a lengthy and complicated discussion of changes that had taken place to Colorado grand jury laws, which had been set in motion prior to JonBenét's murder. Nonetheless, it was clear that the Whites thought Hunter's office had mishandled the investigation and that they were asking Governor Roy Romer's office to intervene and to appoint a special prosecutor to move the case forward. They closed the letter by blaming the Ramseys' refusal to cooperate with the police as the first cause of the reason for the failure in the investigation. Though the murder investigation was now destined to be reviewed by a new set of eyes and ears, the summer of 1998 had not yet witnessed the last of the resignations of Ramsey investigators. Not happy with the direction he thought the case was taking, DA investigator Lou Smit tendered his letter of resignation to Alex Hunter on September 20th, 1998. Dear Alex, it is of great reluctance and regret that I submit this letter of resignation. Even though I want to continue to participate in the official investigation and assist in finding the killer of JonBenét, I find that I cannot in good conscience be a part of the prosecution of innocent people. It would be highly improper and unethical for me to stay when I so strongly believe this. At this point in the investigation, the case tells me that John and Patsy Ramsey did not kill their daughter, that a very dangerous killer is still out there and no one is actively looking for him. The case tells me there is substantial, credible evidence on an intruder and the lack of evidence that the parents were involved. Smit had worked the case for the DA's office for nearly 19 months. His letter of resignation did not signal the end of his participation in the case. However, he would go on to work for the Ramsey family and their attorneys as he proceeded to chase leads of the elusive intruder thought responsible for murdering JonBenét. Okay, we're on page 157. Do you guys want to go see the airport? Oh, I'm having a bad back day, and I just happen to be in an airport. Oh. Got a plane coming in. I missed my flight this morning. And now I am slowly making my way down to California. Okay. Welcome to the airport. Did you guys see Melissa McCartney is doing a new JonBenét movie where she's playing Patsy Ramsey? I'm just hoping that the script isn't meant to further sympathize the Ramsey side of the story. I don't know. So here's the airport. We just got remodeled. So yeah, I'm heading down to California for my sister's memorial and celebration of life. I don't know. This isn't a fun trip for me, and I don't necessarily have the money or the time to be traveling on a whim, so I don't know. I'm just trying to make the most out of a shitty situation. For those of you that do not know, this is the second time I've booted this channel. My last channel, we made it through 5 books, 3 Ramsey books, a book on the, let's see, the James Bulger case in the UK. We did 3 Ramsey books. And I had started the book for Boy Missing, which is the Kyron Horman case, but one of the videos already got a copyright strike, so I'm just going to put that book away until I figure out what's going on with that. So yes, that's what we're doing. Welcome to the airport. I'm trying to walk off my lumbar issue right now. Ugh. A little bit about me. I used to play college basketball. I was a college cheerleader. And now I got a back injuries for days. Landed on my neck doing back handsprings and stuff. Probably did not help, so. My flight isn't till 2, so I got another 20 minutes if you guys want to go check out the newly renovated airport. I got time. The last 10 minutes is us just doing the tour of the airport. Oh. Oof. It's all right. That's me. That's my bad. Yeah, if you guys ever visit Oregon, don't forget we don't have sales tax here. Yeah, it usually takes me like a mile and a half to walk off the stiffness in my lumbar. I have a severe spine injury, and sometimes I get bone spurs on my lower back that I have to kind of break down or wear down by walking forever. So I am avoiding getting spine surgery in 2 places right now because it's about $40,000 surgery. So yeah, I'm heading down to a little town called Crescent City. It's about 15 minutes over the Oregon border. That's where my reservation is. So I'm gonna be stuck in some little crap redneck town. You know, a bunch of randos I haven't seen in 12 years. Cool. But yeah, the town, I'll make sure to film while we're here in Crescent City or whatever. But our town is mostly famous for being like an ocean town. We get a lot of Hollywood films done there. Specifically, our main claim to fame is one of the Star Wars movies. The Ewok Village is still available to see in the Redwood Forest. So if I have time, we'll go check out the Redwood Forest, I guess. I mean, there's so many international viewers, and I get that you guys are like used to my upload here and there, but for the most part, I do this for the thousands of Reddit views. I don't know. So yeah, I'm Native American. My tribe is the Yurok tribe. Y-U-R-O-K. Our tribe was decimated to make way for the California Gold Rush. Decimation means the U.S. government sent in the National Guard. Sent in the National Guard and asked that only 2 out of every 10 people were allowed to live. So we did that for the whole Gold Rush. Hey, Grandma. I'm gonna head back to C11. I'm just walking around. I got a flight coming up. No, I got a bad back day. I'm on a mission. See you later. Have a good day. I'm yelling at my old coworkers. So yeah, this is the newly renovated. Yeah, I worked as a wheelchair attendee for 2 years, assisting y'all's grandmas get into the flights. hella loud. I don't know if I like it over here. Ooh. I'm gliding. Yeah, they're still renovating. For the most part, I'm just over here. I missed my flight, so I'm gonna be waiting and hanging out with my old coworkers for a minute, just looking at the new renovations. Let me see. So I guess this is about the beginning and the end of the renovations. Over here is the TSA. And then before the TSA, there's like a really nice, I guess, indoor stage. I don't fucking know what we're doing. Okay. See you guys in San Francisco. Bye.